Alright, let's go ahead, and it's time to complete this series for units out right now. I didn't get much time to make this guide with Solar Raid being out at the same time, but here we are now. Let's get right onto it. So, Guillotine Winter Slayer is pretty much what we have expected out of her since her kit reveal, and I've talked about it in detail in the other video. A little bit of DPS, a little bit of support. Her mechanics is very simple. She has stacking mechanic called EXP, and every 10 EXP she levels up and self-heals and have some ammo reload to replenish herself. The max level is at 11 where she has accumulated 100 EXP. But even when her level is maxed though, she will continuously stack EXP, and every 10 EXP she will still get the benefit of self-heal and ammo replenish. She can stack faster if she's hitting core only, but it is 2 times slower if she's not hitting the core. This can be somewhat sped up if you also have stacking increase unit like Bunny Alice. However, do keep in mind that Bunny Alice only increases EXP stack roughly every 4.5 seconds. Also keep in mind that it's the EXP being stacked and not the level. More about her level though, the higher the level is, the more buff she provides for water code allies from her skill 1, and the more damage her burst does. On top of her burst dealing damage, her burst also provides additional attack damage buff and elemental bonus to water allies, but this doesn't scale based on level. So I know what you guys are really here for. You're really curious on her performance. Is she worth pulling or worth getting duplicates at all? Well, let's start off with she's basically a bossing unit. She won't really work on campaign due to the lack of AoE, and not on PvP due to being elemental focused and it takes too long to ramp up, and just the overall skill kit that doesn't fit the PvP meta. On top of that, she will pretty much not see any light in day in neutral element. With her kit being overloaded with elemental bonus, she doesn't work out well if you put her in the other 4 elements where she's neutral on. She can improve the water DPS unit by about 10 to 25%, and if we include her own damage comparing to as opposed say an off element unit, we're seeing a total of 20 to 30% more total damage done by the team. This is including her damage. This, however, does go with the assumption that we're only replacing her with a mediocre unit like Drunk Scarlet, which is kind of out of meta now. If we instead replace her with other high valued unit, while your own investment in Guillotine isn't that good, Guillotine's overall effect won't feel as significant, and maybe at even some circumstances, you might even lose damage. So here's some things that you need to pay attention to with these numbers. First, the overall improvement depends on how invested your other units are. The more overload they have with elemental and attack, then the less overall percent increase Guillotine's buff will provide due to diminishing returns just by stacking too much of the elemental and attack percent. Second, Guillotine herself need to be invested as well to make her worth it. Being half DPS herself, she will only start to add her own weight by providing her with a lot of elemental and ammo lines at minimum. Third, Guillotine and the current water units right now don't have good fast charger, sniper, or rocket launcher. This may change in the future, but right now she will have trouble on setting up effective teams. So this goes for the tried and true question, should you pull or get dupes? Well, if you are a tryhard Solar Raid and can and plan to invest well in her in both skills and overload rocks for water Solar Raid, then you will actually see some dividends in using her. However, if you are only planning to give her budget investments, it will depend on how invested your account is as well. But for example, if your other units are also in budget, then technically you will see some improvements on water Solar Raid, mainly because your other units are not as invested as well. But if say you have other stack units that are very invested, then you're not actually going to see some significant improvements. And for dupes, well, if the previous things I've said doesn't help yet, it's primarily for the tryhard wells. So let's say you did plan to use her. It's rather fairly straightforward in terms of prioritization. Like I mentioned previously, it's best to make sure you do plan to invest in her a lot, otherwise you're not going to get much out of her. When upgrading her skills from level 1 to 7, skill 1 increased overall water units damage by about 3 to 8%, skill 2 increased her personal damage by about 15 to 25%, and burst increased her personal damage by about 8 to 15%, and the water allies by about 1 to 5%. Because of this, the prioritization for her skill would be roughly even across the board, as they do help either for herself or for the team. I'd start with 777, going into 10-10-10 with varying tolerance and personal preference. In terms of overload, with heavy emphasis on her being on element and also relying a lot of her basic attacks to deal damage, I would put high priority on getting 4 times elemental and 2 times ammo. Ammo is extremely useful for her getting her levels ramp up faster without reloading too much. And then we have medium priority for 4 times attack, hit rate, or ammo. For cube, she would be best suited with Bastion as it also gets a good benefit with the ammo replenish and it helps her early rush for EXP level ups. Resilience is secondary and could be an option if you have a way higher level compared to Bastion where you can actually get some benefit from elemental bonus. For dolls, for most competitive, I would invest in her to R15 or SR5 tops. Since she's not very competitive DPS unit, I wouldn't overinvest in her too much. Again, part of the reason for this is because you do need her to be very invested in order to make her even worth. For majority of the people, it's either you go all in or don't at all for Guillotine. So now let's move on to team building concept. Because of how solar raid varies and also how likely we will have a bunch of newer units by the time next water solar raid comes out, there's not much to suggest for her team right now aside from giving you the general team building idea. It is within your best interest with Guillotine to 1. Put her in a team with at least 1 but preferably 2 or more water allies. 2. Make sure Guillotine bursts herself to provide additional support buffs as well. And 3. She will work really well with an off-burst DPS that doesn't lose a lot of DPS if they don't do burst 3. Because Guillotine takes up the burst 3 spot in order to fully utilize her, likely the flex unit position we'll be using would be best with another DPS that doesn't require burst 3 spot to deal good damage, either an off-burst DPS or a re-enter DPS like Viper Treasure. A good example of off-burst DPS would be Phantom or Ludmilla, where their bursts only constitute 20% of their damage. Meanwhile, Quency Escape Queen on the other hand has her burst consist of about 40% of her damage, so it's actually best for her to burst. And finally, one thing to note regarding Guillotine's team building is how the current units have difficulty adding fast charger for her team. Grave helps with her burst gauge filling speed, and Mari can fast charge and being one of the meta buffers in the game. But they're not elemental synergy with Guillotine. Having good energy generation is pretty crucial in solo raiding, and with the lack of current synergies right now, it's hard to build teams with the current units available right now. So right now, I do feel that Guillotine's potential is heavily hindered. On top of that, right now, Water currently lacks a Pilgrim top tier DPS. You have Scarlet Black Shadow for Wind, Red Hood and Snow White depending on the boss for Iron, Cinderella for Electric, Modernia and Alice for Fire. If you want to possibly cope for better water DPS in the future, then you could cope for one copy of her. But even then, I feel that there are many alternatives that you can use instead, and you wouldn't miss out from Guillotine unless you heavily invest in her. If you're looking for a budget unit to help with raids, you're not going to miss out too much if you didn't get her. And there's plenty of other alternatives instead that would likely give you similar results by just adjusting the team a little bit. The biggest thing right now is just FOMO. Guillotine's rerun is going to be likely next year, and there's a lot of things that could happen within a year. There's a chance that there's some more synergy later down the road for Guillotine, but this is a risk that you would take. Overall though, if anything, I will just make sure that you do have some savings at the very least for the upcoming New Year unit. So that's one thing, at least making sure that you should have. Imagine if you never got a Scarlet Black Shadow because you decided to try to pull for Guillotine this time around. In any case, that's about it for now. Make sure you guys subscribe if you enjoyed the content and go ahead and like the video. I do go live on Twitch often at twitch.tv/guygilb, so be sure to catch me there, and I'll see you guys next time. By the way, did you know that 56% of you still hasn't subscribed yet? Make sure to click that subscribe button, click that bell notification, leave a comment, like, and subscribe.